Money is a heavily engineered technology. It's a system built to solve one primary problem: how to scale human trust across an entire civilization. Look at these cowrie shells. Early economies used commodities like this, or relied on direct barter to trade goods. But trying to exchange grain for shells or lumber for beads created massive friction. The system was local, slow, and impossible to scale. Societies eventually upgraded to precious metals. However, this created a new bottleneck. Every transaction required merchants to physically weigh and test irregular lumps of gold to verify their purity, causing economic velocity to grind to a halt. This electrum lump is the Lydian lion trite from 560 BCE, humanity's first major interface upgrade. Notice the roaring lion stamped into the surface. That stamp acted as a systemic guarantee. It verified the weight and purity of the metal, so the user didn't have to. For the first time, buyers and sellers could put away scales and simply count their money. Charlemagne's Carolingian penny pushed the interface further in 794 AD. By enforcing a universal standard of weight and design across the Holy Roman Empire, it allowed merchants to count vast sums with speed and precision. These physical updates solved the usability problem, but they introduced a systemic bug. Users now had to blindly trust that the central authority wouldn't secretly reduce the amount of silver in the coin while keeping the stamp the same. Whenever a governing authority tampers with the underlying value of its currency, the users immediately protect their wealth by changing how they spend. This is Gresham's law, the principle that artificially overvalued money drives out the good. If the government forces a degraded coin to have the same legal value as a pure one, people will hoard the good money and spend the bad. You can see this in the 1792 U.S. Coinage Act, fixing the gold-to-silver ratio at 15:1. As silver's market value dropped, the legal ratio failed. Users hoarded the undervalued gold, forcing the domestic economy to rely almost entirely on silver. Any legal attempt to artificially fix the price of money breaks the system's trust protocol. It forces users to defend their purchasing power by opting out of the official circulation. A system anchored to physical gold is rigid. It prevents a government from rapidly expanding the money supply to fund a war or national expansion. This tension creates a constant demand for elastic money, notes that can be printed on demand. The Jacksonian movement of the 1830s was a direct pushback against this elasticity. These hard money advocates sought to eliminate central banking and enforce a system where every note was backed 100% by physical gold or silver. The stress of the Civil War eventually broke that architecture. To fund the military, the U.S. issued unbacked fiat notes known as greenbacks, the first time the currency was severed from physical metal. Printing these notes triggered massive inflation. It demonstrated that elastic money often acts as a hidden tax, where the government gains spending power while the public's existing savings lose value. The return to the classical gold standard placed a physical governor on the printing press. Because every paper dollar was legally tied to a fixed weight of gold, wholesale prices in 1896 were lower than they were in 1880, providing a decade of predictable, engineered stability. While fiat elasticity allows a government to survive an immediate crisis, the rigid physics of hard money provides the predictable environment required for long-term growth. In 1944, the Bretton Woods Agreement engineered a global hybrid system. Other nations pegged their currencies to the dollar, and the dollar remained pegged to a fixed amount of physical gold. This system had a mathematical flaw called the Triffin dilemma. To satisfy the global trade, the U.S. had to print more dollars than it had gold to back them up, creating a massive imbalance in the system. When foreign nations realized the imbalance and began demanding their physical gold, the system crashed. In 1971, President Nixon officially severed the gold peg, ending the dollar's link to any physical commodity. This Nixon shock deleted the system's physical speed limiter. It launched the global economy into a massive, ongoing test of pure, floating fiat money. Without a physical anchor, central banks can expand the supply of money 4.0 indefinitely. The result is a steady, silent drain on your purchasing power through inflation. Cryptocurrencies represent the first attempt to re-engineer absolute digital scarcity. They use decentralized networks to enforce limits on the supply, without requiring a central bank to be the trusted authority. The next evolution in unhackable money moves past the reach of software algorithms and into the laws of physics, quantum money. By encoding value into qubits, we utilize the no-cloning theorem. Attempting to copy the data causes the original asset to violently shatter into static. This makes it physically impossible to counterfeit the currency. The laws of nature prevent the creation of a duplicate. From the Lydian lion to the physics of the quantum wallet, the goal remains the same. We are searching for an uncorruptible anchor, a way to guarantee that the time and labor we spend today will still hold its value tomorrow.
Okay, let's unpack this, because I want you to do me a favor.
All right.
Next time you have a physical dollar bill in your hand, or next time you're just staring at that digital balance sitting in your banking app.
Which is most of us, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Take a second and really look at it. And I want you to ask yourself, like, why does everyone around me just universally agree that this has value?
It's a great question.
Seriously, why can you hand a stranger a crumpled green piece of paper with a dead president on it, and they'll gladly hand you a hot cup of coffee or a sandwich or even the keys to a car?
Yeah, it really is the ultimate shared illusion, isn't it?
It totally is.
Because when you strip it down to its absolute core, we are trading thousands of hours of our labor, our physical energy, our sweat, and our limited time on this earth.
Right.
All for pieces of paper. Or, increasingly just pixels on a digital screen.
Exactly. And usually when we talk about a transaction in the real world, there is an expectation of a tangible physical exchange of utility. Like, you give me a wooden chair to sit on, and I give you a pair of leather shoes to wear. It's physical, it's real, the utility is obvious.
Sure.
But then you step into the world of money, and suddenly that solid reality gets incredibly murky.
Oh, it is the absolute definition of a muddy water scenario applied to macroeconomics.
Yeah.
Because money isn't just math. It certainly isn't just metal or paper or computer code. Money is fundamentally a profound social contract.
Right.
It's a measure of trust. And what we are going to explore today in this deep dive is how, historically, when governments or rulers alter that social contract.
Like by debasing it.
Exactly, by secretly debasing coins or by printing unbacked paper money out of thin air, it doesn't just cause prices to go up, it literally changes the trajectory of human history.
It topples empires.
It absolutely topples empires.
Which is exactly our mission for this deep dive today.
Yeah.
We are going to uncover the fundamental mechanics of what actually gives money its value.
And we've got a lot of ground to cover.
We really do. We're looking at a 2,600-year tug-of-war. On one side, you have commodity-backed money, so things like gold and silver.
Right.
And on the other side, you have fiat currency, which is essentially money decreed by a government, backed by nothing but the law.
And to do this, we are synthesizing an incredible stack of sources for you today.
Oh yeah, massive stack.
We're pulling from deep historical numismatic analyses, really heavy economic treatises on the history of U.S. banking.
And Gresham's law stuff.
Yeah, deep dives into Gresham's law, and even forward-looking research on digital and quantum currencies.
Which is wild, by the way. But the goal here is to synthesize all of this so you, the listener, can understand not just the timeline of what happened, but the underlying mechanisms of why it happened.
Exactly. Because the fascinating and honestly sometimes terrifying thing about monetary history is that the exact same patterns keep repeating themselves.
Like clockwork.
Over and over. From the ancient Mediterranean right up to the modern digital age, human nature reacting to money remains remarkably consistent.
Right. Because to understand why modern economies are suddenly struggling with this massive, stubborn inflation today, why a trip to the grocery store suddenly feels like a luxury experience.
It really does.
We actually have to go all the way back to the very first attempts humanity made to standardize value.
The very beginning.
Yeah, before there was a dollar, before the British pound, before the Roman denarius, there was just stuff.
Right, the barter system. It's where every single economic history essentially begins.
Right.
But historical records and economic anthropologists highlight a critical fundamental flaw in bartering. It relied on something called the double coincidence of wants.
The double coincidence of wants.
Yes, and it simply didn't scale.
Okay, let's break that down. The double coincidence of wants. I mean, that sounds like a terrible romantic comedy.
It really does. But it's essentially an economic matching problem.
Okay.
Let's say you are a farmer, right? And you have a surplus of wheat.
Yeah.
And you want to buy a cow. In a pure barter economy, you have to find someone who actually has a cow. That's the first coincidence.
Right. I have to locate the cow guy.
But then that specific person with the cow must also specifically want your wheat at that exact moment in time.
Oh.
That's the double coincidence.
It's like trying to find someone on a dating app who has your exact hyper-specific niche hobbies, who also happens to live next door, and who is looking for someone exactly like you at that very second.
That is a very accurate comparison.
The friction is just enormous.
The friction is so enormous that it effectively stalls human progress. I mean, if the guy with the cow wants lumber instead of wheat, well,
I'm stuck.
you have to go find a lumberjack who wants wheat. Trade your wheat for lumber and then take the lumber to the guy with the cow.
Which means I'm spending all my time trading and literally no time actually farming.
Precisely. So because of that massive friction, early societies naturally gravitated toward using intermediate commodity.
Things that were generally desired by everyone?
Right. So you could trade your wheat for this intermediate thing, knowing the cow guy would eventually accept it.
And we call this a medium of exchange.
Exactly. And early societies experimented with all sorts of things, but they quickly realized that this medium needed very specific properties.
Right.
It needed to be durable, so, it wouldn't rot like an apple.
Or a fish.
Exactly. It needed to be divisible so you could make small purchases. But most importantly, it needed to be scarce.
Right. Scarcity is the key, because if your money literally grows on trees, then everyone is infinitely rich.
Which means the money is totally worthless.
Right.
Which is why the sources point out that early global trade networks often relied on things like cowrie shells in ancient China.
Oh, wow. Shells?
Yeah. Or specific, intricately crafted glass beads in various African societies.
Okay.
These items had value primarily because they were geographically isolated, incredibly difficult to obtain, or, they required immense human labor to replicate.
They had inherent scarcity.
Precisely. But eventually, humanity upgraded from shells and beads to, well, shiny rocks.
The classic precious metals, gold and silver.
Yes. Precious metals became the ultimate global standard because they perfectly fit all the criteria for money.
Because they don't rot.
Right. Gold, for instance, doesn't tarnish or rust. It is virtually indestructible.
You can chop it up.
Highly divisible. You can melt it down and chop it up endlessly. And crucially, it is incredibly rare and requires immense physical energy to extract from the earth.
Right.
Ancient civilizations, the Egyptians, the Greeks, the Romans, they all recognized this and utilized them as a store of value.
But, and this is a big thought, but even with gold and silver chunks, there was still a massive friction point in daily commerce, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Because if I hand you a rock that I claim is a pure gold nugget, I mean, how do you know I'm telling the truth?
You don't.
How do you know it's actually pure and not just lead wrapped in thin layer of gold? And how do you know exactly how much it weighs?
That was the absolute nightmare of ancient commerce. For every single transaction, merchants had to act like amateur metallurgists.
Wow.
You would have to whip out a balance scale, weigh the metal, and then use a touchstone or chemical tests to verify its purity.
Just to buy something simple. Imagine trying to buy a loaf of bread, but first, you and the baker have to sit down for 20 minutes with a literal chemistry set and a scale.
You would take all day just to run errands.
It was incredibly inefficient. And I think this brings us to what the sources highlight as a monumental leap in human technology.
Yes, the first coin.
Right. What is widely considered by numismatists to be the very first official state-issued coin.
Minted around 630 to 620 BCE.
In a place called Anatolia, which is modern-day Turkey, in an ancient kingdom called Lydia.
The Lydian lion trite.
Mined under the Mermnad kings. I love the historical context of this because it ties right into Greek mythology.
It really does. The geography here is fascinating. The Lydians extracted their incredible wealth from the Pactolus River, which was famous in the ancient world for its golden sands. And if we connect this to the broader cultural picture, this is the exact same river associated with the famous myth of King Midas.
King Midas, the king with the golden touch.
That's the one.
The legend goes that he was cursed, so everything he touched turned to gold, including his food and, like, his daughter.
Right.
And to cure himself, he was told to wash in the Pactolus River, and the gold washed off him into the water. That's why the river was full of gold.
It's a beautiful origin story for money,
It really is.
but the geological reality presented a very practical problem.
Okay.
The river didn't yield pure gold, it yielded something called electrum.
Electrum.
Yeah, it's a naturally occurring alloy, a natural mix of gold and silver blended together in the earth.
And let me guess, nature doesn't mix things in perfect, standardized ratios.
Not at all. And that created a monumental headache for the Lydian merchants.
I bet.
Because it was a natural mix, the purity of electrum varied wildly from nugget to nugget.
Oh, that's a problem.
A huge one. One lump you pull from the river might be 75% gold. The next lump might be only 40% gold and mostly silver.
Wow.
So you could have two chunks of electrum that weighed the exact same amount on a scale, but they had vastly different actual intrinsic values.
Which completely ruins the whole point of having a medium of exchange.
Exactly.
You are right back to arguing with the baker over whether your shiny rock is golden enough to buy his bread. You haven't solved the friction problem. You've just changed the subject of the argument.
Right. So the Lydian king, likely King Alyattes, came up with an ingenious, world-changing solution.
Okay.
The state stepped in. The royal mint took these irregular lumps of electrum, melted them down, adjusted the alloy to a somewhat consistent standard, and then formed them into specific standardized weights.
Standardized weights.
Yes. The most famous was the trite, which weighed exactly 4.70 grams.
But they didn't just weigh it, right? They stamped it. And the design wasn't just decorative. The sources say it was a roaring lion with a sunburst above its head. And the lion was the universal symbol of the Mermnad royal family's power.
The physical process of minting this is crucial to understand.
Walk us through it.
They would take this blank 4.70-gram lump of electrum. They placed it on an anvil that had the lion design carved directly into the iron.
Right.
Then they took a square punch, placed it on the back of the electrum lump, and literally smashed it with a heavy hammer.
So the front gets a line pressed into it, and the back just has these two primitive square indentations from the punch.
Exactly.
It sounds crude, but the technological and economic leap here is staggering. Let me run an analogy by you.
Go for it.
Isn't the king's stamp essentially the ancient 600 BCE version of a verified blue checkmark on social media?
Oh, that's interesting. How do you mean?
Well, the stamp doesn't physically change the item at all. The electrum is still exactly the same electrum it was a minute ago. It doesn't magically become heavier.
Oh.
But the stamp provides instantaneous trust. It proves the source and the authenticity of the item, saving everyone else the time of verifying it themselves.
That is a brilliant way to frame it. Yes, it is the ultimate verification badge.
Right.
By stamping that roaring lion on the coin, the king was essentially making a public decree. You do not need to weigh this. You do not need to test its purity.
My reputation guarantees it.
Exactly. My royal authority guarantees its value. It was the exact moment in human history that money got a face.
And it completely revolutionized global trade, because suddenly you didn't need to negotiate the value of the money anymore. You only had to negotiate the price of the goods.
It stripped the friction out of the market.
It really did. Though we should clarify that this particular coin, the Lydian trite, wasn't exactly pocket change for buying an ancient cup of coffee.
No, absolutely not. The trite, which literally means 1/3 of a standard stater coin, represented serious concentrated wealth.
Like how much?
Well, estimates from historical purchasing power suggest a single Lydian trite was equivalent to about a month's subsistence pay for a soldier,
Wow.
or enough to buy roughly 11 sheep.
11 sheep.
Yeah, this was high-level stored wealth. This was for buying real estate or funding merchant voyages.
Still, the concept of state-verified coinage caught on like wildfire.
Oh, everywhere.
The Greeks adopted it, the Romans built an empire on it, and the sources point out that if we fast forward a bit to 794 AD, we see another massive leap in how human beings structure money, this time with Charlemagne.
Yes, the Carolingian penny.
Right.
When Charlemagne consolidated power and formed the Holy Roman Empire, he faced a fractured, totally chaotic economy with dozens of different local weights and measures.
A mess.
A total mess. So he instituted a massive monetary reform across Europe. He introduced a singular standardized silver coin called the denarius.
And he mandated that this denarius had to contain exactly 1.7 grams of pure silver.
Correct.
But he didn't just introduce a coin, he introduced a whole psychological system of financial accounting.
He established what became known as the LSD system, Librae Silidi Denari.
Okay, LSD.
Charlemagne decreed that 12 of these silver denarii equaled one solidus, which was an accounting concept based on an old Roman gold coin.
Got it.
And 240 denarii equaled exactly 1 libra, or 1 pound of silver.
Wait, so when the British talk about the pound, the word literally originated to mean an actual physical pound of silver pennies.
Precise.
That is wild.
If a merchant owed you a pound for a cart full of goods, they didn't have to put a massive chunk of silver on a scale.
Right.
They could literally just count out 240 individual silver denarii. Because the state guaranteed the weight of each coin, counting became a substitute for weighing.
That is just brilliant. It totally separated the concept of the unit of account, meaning the abstract numbers we use to measure value in our heads, from the medium exchange, the physical, clinking silver changing hands.
It did, and that specific accounting system, 12 pennies to a shilling, 20 shillings to a pound, was so remarkably effective that it remained the basis of British currency for over 1,000 years.
Over 1,000 years.
Yeah, all the way until they finally decimalized in 1971.
Okay, so let's synthesize this first part. The Lydian lion and the Carolingian penny both worked because the physical metal inside the coin was actually worth what the state said it was worth.
Right.
The stamp just verified the metal. The king was essentially being honest.
Essentially, yes.
But what happens if a government decides they want to use gold and silver at the same time? How do you guarantee the value of two different metals against each other?
That is where the history of money gets incredibly complex,
I can imagine.
and where we run headfirst into the inescapable laws of monetary physics. It's a system called bimetallism.
Bimetallism.
Yes. And when a government tries to legally fix the exchange rate between gold and silver, they inevitably run into the relentless reality of global free markets.
And to explore this, the sources bring us right to the birth of the United States. Specifically, the Coinage Act of 1792.
Yes. To set the stage here, the founding fathers of the United States were intimately, painfully aware of the dangers of printing unbacked paper money.
Right, because of the Revolutionary War.
Exactly. During the war, the Continental Congress printed a paper currency called the Continental to fund the army.
And they printed way too much.
They printed so much of it that it hyperinflated until it was completely worthless.
Hence the old American idiom, not worth a continental.
Exactly. Because of that trauma, the U.S. Constitution expressly forbade individual states from emitting bills of credit, which meant paper money.
Wow.
They wanted a hard money system rooted in precious metals.
Enter Alexander Hamilton, the first Secretary of the Treasury.
Yeah.
He guided the Coinage Act of 1792, which officially established the U.S. Mint. And he had a problem, right?
A very big problem.
The new nation didn't have enough gold to solely rely on a gold standard, and they didn't have enough silver to rely only on silver.
Right.
He needed both metals to circulate to provide enough liquidity for the economy to actually function. So he set up a bimetallic standard.
Right. Under Hamilton's system, the U.S. dollar wasn't just one thing. It was legally defined in two ways. A dollar was legally defined as consisting of exactly 371.25 grains of pure silver.
Okay, that's one.
Or 24.75 grains of pure gold.
And if you do the math on those grains, that creates a fixed legal ratio.
Yes.
Exactly 15 to 1. The U.S. government declared that, by law, 15 ounces of silver were worth exactly 1 ounce of gold.
And the mint operated on a principle of free coinage.
What does that mean?
That meant any citizen could bring raw silver or gold bullion to the U.S. Mint, have it melted and stamped into official coins for free.
Oh, wow.
And then use those coins as legal tender to pay any debts or taxes.
I mean, it sounds perfectly logical on paper. Hamilton wanted to increase the money supply, but the free market has a very funny way of completely ignoring what politicians write down on pieces of paper.
Always. Every single time.
Yeah.
At the exact moment Hamilton wrote the law in 1792, the world market ratio of silver to gold actually was about 15 to 1.
So he was right at the time.
His math was perfectly aligned with reality for that specific snapshot in time. But global commodity markets are incredibly dynamic.
They move.
Over the next decade or two, massive, unprecedented amounts of silver started pouring out of incredibly rich mines in Mexico and South America.
Basic supply and demand. Suddenly, there's way more silver flooding into the global market,
Yes.
which means silver becomes less rare and therefore less valuable relative to gold.
Exactly. By around 1805, the global free market ratio had shifted. In Europe, it now took about 15.75 ounces of silver to buy 1 ounce of gold on the open market.
Let's slow down and look at the trap that creates. The U.S. government is sitting there with a rigid law on the books saying the ratio is strictly 15 to 1.
Right.
But the rest of the world says the ratio is 15.75 to 1.
This creates an unavoidable economic phenomenon called an arbitrage opportunity.
Okay.
In the United States, the government is officially overvaluing silver, saying it's worth more gold than it actually is in reality, and undervaluing gold compared to the rest of the global market.
Will you walk through a hypothetical to make sure I understand the mechanics of this because it's so vital?
Please do.
I want to picture myself as an American merchant in Philadelphia in, say, 1805.
Okay, you're a merchant.
I have 1 ounce of gold in my hand. If I walk down the street to the U.S. Mint and spend it, or use it to pay a debt, the law says it's only worth 15 ounces of silver.
Correct. That's the law.
But if I'm a smart merchant, I don't go to the U.S. Mint. I take that 1 ounce of gold, I put it on a ship, and I send it to a broker in Europe.
Yeah.
In Europe, the free market gives me 15.75 ounces of silver for my gold.
Exactly.
Then I put that 15.75 ounces of silver back on a ship to Philadelphia.
Getting closer.
I walk into the U.S. Mint. I use exactly 15 ounces of that silver to buy back 1 whole ounce of gold because the U.S. law says I can.
Right.
And I am left with my original 1 ounce of gold plus 0.75 ounces of silver sitting in my pocket as pure risk-free profit.
You've just executed a perfect currency arbitrage.
Wow.
Now, what do you do the next day?
I do it again. I'd ship every single ounce of gold I could legally get my hands on to Europe. I'd bleed the country dry of gold to capture that spread.
And that is exactly what the banking and merchant classes did. By doing this repeatedly, the gold completely vanished from circulation in the United States.
Just poof, gone.
It was all either exported abroad or hoarded in private vaults. This historical event is the classic textbook manifestation of Gresham's Law.
Gresham's Law. The sources talk about this extensively. Let's unpack that. It's named after Sir Thomas Gresham, who was a 16th century financial advisor to Queen Elizabeth I.
Yes. Gresham noticed this phenomenon happening in England after Elizabeth's predecessors, specifically King Henry VIII and Edward VI, engaged in something called the Great Debasement.
The Great Debasement.
Right. Henry VIII desperately needed money to fund his wars and his lavish lifestyle, so he secretly ordered the mints to reduce the amount of actual silver in English shillings.
To cheat the system.
Exactly, replacing it with cheap base metals like copper.
Which is why Henry VIII's historical nickname among the public was Old Copper Nose. Because the thin layer of silver on his coins would rub off on the most prominent part of the king's portrait, his nose revealing the cheap copper underneath. I just love that detail.
It's a great historical detail. And Gresham famously explained to Queen Elizabeth that when this happens, bad money drives out good.
Bad money drives out good.
If a government creates bad money, like copper-filled shillings, and good money, pure silver shillings, and mandates by law that they must be treated as having the exact same value.
Which they aren't.
Right. People will always hoard the good, intrinsically valuable money and rapidly spend the bad, debased money to get rid of it.
I've always thought about this using a food analogy.
Okay, let's hear it.
If I open the fridge and I see a fresh, perfect, artisanal slice of pizza from a great local place,
Sounds good.
and sitting right next to it is a stale, day-old slice of cheap, frozen cardboard pizza, I'm eating the stale one first to get rid of it before it goes completely rotten, and I am saving the good, high-quality slice for later. People do the exact same thing with their currency. You spend the junk, you hoard the treasure.
I like the pizza analogy, but we actually need to adjust it slightly to truly capture the mechanics of Gresham's Law.
Oh, how so?
In your fridge scenario, nobody is forcing you to eat the stale pizza. You are making a free choice based on preference. Gresham's Law specifically relies on the force of law.
Okay, right.
Yeah.
So how do we adjust the analogy?
Imagine a scenario where you have a roommate, and the government passes a legal pizza tender law that says all slices of pizza, regardless of quality, must be valued exactly at $10.
Okay, I see where this is going.
If your roommate wants to buy your bicycle for $10, and they can choose to pay you with either the fresh artisanal slice or the stale cardboard slice.
They're going to hand me the stale slice.
Exactly. And because of the law, you are forced to accept it.
Ah, that makes perfect sense. Because the law compels me to treat them equally, my roommate takes advantage of the discrepancy. They pass the bad asset onto me and keep the good asset for themselves.
Precisely. Gresham's Law is often misunderstood by people as a failure of the free market.
It's not.
It is not a free market failure at all. It is a highly rational, predictable market response to a government enforcing compulsory legal tender laws that ignore underlying market realities.
Right.
When you are forced to accept bad money at face value, naturally, everyone tries to pass the bad money on to someone else like a hot potato.
And the historical record details some hilarious, almost tragic consequences of this in early 19th century America.
Yeah.
Because it wasn't just gold disappearing from the U.S. economy.
No.
Even different types of silver coins fell victim to Gresham's law.
Right, because remember, Hamilton's mint was stamping out heavy, beautiful, newly minted American silver dollars.
Right.
But there was a robust trade network with the Caribbean and Latin American colonies. Those colonies also used silver dollars, primarily Spanish pieces of 8.
Okay.
Only they were perfectly happy to accept slightly lighter, older, worn-down Spanish silver dollars at the exact same face value as a brand-new, heavy American dollar.
So the merchants saw another arbitrage.
You bet they did.
Americans just hoarded the heavy, newly minted American silver dollars, shipped them down to the Caribbean, traded them by weight for a larger quantity of lightweight, worn-out Spanish fractional coins, and brought those lightweight coins back to the U.S. to spend at face value.
Yes. It left the early United States economy in a bizarre state.
I can imagine.
They had virtually no gold. They had none of their own American silver dollars. The circulating currency consisted almost entirely of lightweight, worn-out, foreign Spanish coins.
Wow.
The government's attempt to mandate a fixed ratio completely failed against the relentless gravity of human self-interest.
And we shouldn't act like this is just ancient powdered wig history.
Not at all.
The source is clear that Gresham's law strikes constantly in modern times, right in our own pockets. Take the U.S. penny.
A perfect modern example.
Before 1982, American pennies were made mostly of solid copper. But as the 1970s brought massive inflation, the prices of raw commodities, including copper, skyrocketed.
Right.
Eventually, the actual copper metal inside the penny became worth more on the commodities market than 1 single cent.
The intrinsic melt value exceeded the legal face value.
Exactly. So in 1982, the U.S. Mint was forced to quietly change the composition of the penny. They switched it to a core of 97.5% zinc, which is much cheaper, covered in just a thin copper plating to make it look the same.
Yep.
The face value remained 1 cent by law, but the intrinsic value of the new zinc penny was drastically lower.
Good money and bad money.
Good money and bad money. The old solid copper pennies were the good money, the new zinc pennies were the bad money, and what did the American public do?
They spontaneously executed Gresham's law.
They totally did. People started hoarding the pre-1982 copper pennies. They melted them down for scrap or just filled massive glass jugs with them in their garages while happily spending the new zinc ones at the cash register.
It became such an arbitrage problem that the U.S. government actually had to pass federal laws making it a crime to melt down pennies for profit.
Which is just, I mean, it's wild when you think about it.
And we saw the exact same script play out again very recently with the U.S. nickel. In March 2022, due to global supply chain shocks and spikes in industrial metal prices, the melt value of the nickel and copper inside a standard U.S. 5-cent coin hit almost 8 cents.
The metal was worth nearly 60% more than the face value of the coin. If you melted a $2 roll of nickels, you instantly made a profit.
Which is why the U.S. Mint is inevitably forced to constantly search for cheaper, baser metals to substitute into their coins over time.
Because broader inflation quietly destroys the purchasing power of the currency itself.
Exactly.
So Gresham's law shows us just how incredibly difficult, maybe even impossible it is, to maintain a metallic standard when you are trying to force a fixed ratio. The market will always find the arbitrage and drain the system.
Always. And this chronic structural difficulty of balancing precious metals sets the stage for the next major evolution in our deep dive.
Right.
Because when maintaining a metallic standard becomes too politically difficult, or when governments face immense existential financial stress, they look for a way out.
They look for a cheat code.
They look toward fiat money.
Fiat. It comes
Yeah.
from the Latin word meaning let it be done or it shall be. It refers to money that is money, simply because the government points a gun and says it is.
Backed by nothing but the law.
Right. And historically, the push for fiat in the United States usually coincides with one very specific, very expensive human activity.
War.
War.
War is the great destroyer of sound money.
So let's examine the War of 1812.
Okay. The U.S. government needed to rapidly finance a war against the British Empire, and they relied heavily on the banking sector.
Right.
At this time, we need to understand how banks functioned. They utilized fractional reserve banking.
Okay.
Banks issued paper banknotes to the public. These paper notes were, in theory, fully redeemable on demand for gold or silver specie.
Let me do an ELI 5, explain it like I'm 5 for fractional reserve banking, because it's the core of the problem here.
Go ahead.
If I take 10 gold coins and deposit them in a bank for safekeeping, the bank gives me 10 paper receipts.
Right.
I can walk around town and use those paper receipts to buy groceries because the grocer knows he can take that paper back to the bank and get the gold.
Exactly.
But the bank doesn't just leave my 10 gold coins sitting in the vault gathering dust. They realize that not everyone comes to claim their gold at the exact same time.
Right. It's a probability game.
So the bank prints an extra 90 paper receipts out of thin air and lends them out to other people to earn interest.
Right.
There are now 100 paper receipts circulating in the town, but only 10 actual gold coins in the vault.
That is the essence of fractional banking. And during the War of 1812, the banks drastically accelerated this process.
Oh, so they did.
They printed vastly more paper receipts than they had gold in their vaults, largely to buy government war bonds to fund the military. The money supply just exploded.
Wow.
But by 1814, as the war dragged on and Washington, D.C. was literally burned by the British, public confidence cracked.
People started to get nervous.
Yes. They rushed the banks to demand their physical gold back, a classic bank run.
And the banks, of course, did not have enough gold to pay everyone.
Not even close. They were facing imminent systemic collapse.
So what did the government do? Did they let the banks fail for breaching their contracts with their depositors?
No. In August 1814, the government simply changed the rules.
Wow.
They officially allowed the banks to suspend specie payments. They gave the banking system legal permission to flat out refuse to hand over the gold they legally owed their depositors.
And yet, bizarrely, the banks were allowed to keep their doors open.
Yes, continue operating and continue demanding that everyday citizens repay their loans to the bank.
Wait, hold on. The government told the banks, you don't have to honor your contracts to pay out gold to the public, but you can use the force of law to make the public keep paying you.
That's what happened.
That doesn't sound like a free market. That sounds like a rigged casino where the house simply unplugs the machines when you hit the jackpot.
Many economic historians, including the sources we're reviewing, characterize it as a flagrant, state-sanctioned violation of property rights.
It really is.
This suspension of gold payments lasted for years, until 1817. And without the strict requirement to redeem their notes in actual gold, the banks just kept printing more and more paper.
And the inevitable result was massive inflation.
Exactly. Wholesale prices in the U.S. rose by 35% during the war period.
It set a terrifying precedent. It communicated a clear message to the financial system. If you get greedy, over-leverage yourself, and inflate the currency, the government will just change the legal rules of money to bail you out.
And that precise precedent became the blueprint for an even larger crisis a few decades later, the American Civil War.
Oh man, the Civil War.
When the Civil War broke out in 1861, the financial scale of the conflict was unprecedented. Federal expenditures skyrocketed from a modest $66 million before the war to over $1.3 billion in just 4 years.
That is an astronomical leap. How do you even begin to pay for that?
Initially, the Treasury, under Secretary Salmon P. Chase, tried to borrow physical gold from the major Eastern banks to pay contractors and soldiers. But the costs were so staggering that they quickly drained the bank's reserves. By December 1861, realizing the vaults were emptying, the banks suspended gold payments again.
Just like in 1814.
Exactly. And the U.S. Treasury, entirely out of funds, quickly followed suit.
So the United States government officially announced it couldn't pay its debts in gold.
Right.
So, out of desperation, they turned to the printing press. In February 1862, Congress passed the Legal Tender Act.
Yes.
They created entirely new United States notes, which the public quickly started calling greenbacks because of the distinct green ink printed on the reverse side.
These were pure fiat. They were not backed by gold. They were backed only by the government's declaration that they were legal tender for all debts, public and private.
The legal tender law again.
Right. Congress printed $150 million of them immediately. And to ease the public's anxiety, Congress explicitly declared that this would be the first and last emergency issue of paper money.
Which has to be the biggest, most predictable lie in financial history.
Oh, without a doubt.
Because the war kept going. A few months later, they printed another 150 million, and then another batch.
It never stops at one.
By 1864, there were over 415 million greenbacks flooding the northern economy.
And because these greenbacks were fundamentally unbacked paper, their purchasing power plummeted on the open market.
Naturally.
People intuitively knew that physical gold was better than government paper. And as the Union Army suffered terrible defeats on the battlefield, confidence in the government's ability to survive, let alone redeem the paper, waned drastically.
At one point, the greenback plummeted so far that one paper dollar was worth just 35 cents in gold.
It was devastating.
And here comes our old friend Gresham's Law crashing back into the story. Because the paper money was losing its value so fast, all the good money in the economy completely vanished.
It just disappeared.
People hoarded their silver coins and desperately spent the depreciating paper greenbacks.
The disappearance of all silver coins, even the tiny half-dimes and quarters, created a bizarre, paralyzing crisis for ordinary daily commerce.
That's so.
You literally couldn't make change. If you went to the market to buy a 5-cent apple, but you only had a $1 paper greenback, the merchant had no physical coins in his register to give you your 95 cents back. Commerce essentially ground to a halt.
The workaround for this is absolutely wild. The historical records show that the government desperately started issuing unglued postage stamps for people to use as small change.
Unbelievable.
Imagine being a shopkeeper and having someone pay for groceries with a handful of unglued stamps.
It's absurd.
Eventually, the Treasury had to print literal paper, fractional notes, tiny, fragile paper tickets worth 3 cents, 5 cents, 10 cents, just to keep the economy moving.
It perfectly highlights the cascading chaos of a rapidly depreciating fiat currency. But what is truly instructive here, from a historical perspective, is how the government reacted to the falling value of the greenback.
This is fascinating.
Secretary of the Treasury Chase refused to acknowledge that flooding the market with 415 million paper notes was causing the depreciation.
Of course not.
Instead, he sought a scapegoat. He blamed anonymous gold speculators.
It's a tale as old as time. It's always the speculator's fault, right? Never the guy actually pulling the lever on the printing press.
Chase actively campaigned to legally crush the gold market. In March 1864, he convinced Congress to levy severe taxes on gold sales.
Okay.
When that failed to stop the greenback's slide, in June, he drove through a despotic legislative measure that outright prohibited all futures contracts in gold under pain of severe fines and imprisonment.
Wait, really?
He essentially made it illegal for anyone to bet on the future price of gold.
Yeah. And how did the free market react to the government making gold trading illegal?
With absolute, utter panic. The gold market descended into chaos. Businessmen who needed gold to facilitate international trade clamored for the repeal of the law.
Because they needed it to run their businesses.
Exactly. Public confidence in the greenback actually plummeted faster due to the draconian intervention, falling to 40 cents in gold by the end of June.
It backfired completely.
The disastrous bill caused such economic turmoil that it was hastily repealed just 2 weeks after it was passed, and Secretary Chase was forced to resign from office.
You cannot legislate away the laws of supply and demand. You just can't.
You really can't.
But I want to push back on something here. When we look at this history, wasn't printing the greenbacks a strict, absolute necessity?
That's the common view.
I mean, the Union was fighting for its literal survival. If they hadn't printed that money, they couldn't have paid the soldiers, and the United States might have been permanently torn in two.
Yeah.
Isn't surviving the war worth the cost of some inflation?
That is the standard historical defense, yes. And it's a very valid perspective on the pressures of wartime leadership.
Okay.
However, the economic historians in our sources point out that printing money is never the only option. It is simply the most politically expedient one.
Ah, right.
The government could have raised taxes much earlier and more aggressively, or they could have sold war bonds at much higher interest rates to attract real capital.
But raising taxes during a brutal war makes politicians incredibly unpopular.
Precisely. Taxation is visible and painful. The public sees the money leaving their paychecks.
Right.
Inflation, on the other hand, is a hidden tax. It transfers wealth from the public's savings to the government's treasury silently by diluting the purchasing power of the money already in people's pockets.
That's brutal.
It achieves the exact same funding goal, but it avoids the immediate political backlash of a direct tax levy.
That's a sobering way to look at it. Inflation is taxation without legislation.
That's exactly what it is.
But the post-Civil War period actually offers a really fascinating counterexample. After the war ended, the U.S. government actually decided to do the hard thing.
They did.
They decided to endure the painful process of contracting the money supply to return to the discipline of the gold standard.
It took over a decade of bitter political fighting, but in 1879, the U.S. successfully enacted the resumption of specie payments.
Meaning what?
This meant that the paper greenbacks still in circulation were once again fully convertible into physical gold at their pre-war face value.
Now wait, if you apply modern economics theory to that, shrinking the money supply and creating deflation should cause a massive crippling recession.
Right.
If prices are falling, people stop spending, businesses go bankrupt, right?
Interestingly, the historical record of this specific era shows the exact opposite.
Really?
Yes. Returning to the classical gold standard and contracting the money supply ushered in a period of phenomenal, unprecedented economic growth in the United States.
Wow.
Capital investment from Europe flooded in because the currency was trusted. Technological innovation boomed, and while the money supply contracted and prices gently fell, the wholesale price index dropped a massive 40.4% between 1869 and 1879. Wages did not fall as fast.
Meaning real wages, actual purchasing power went up.
Yes, the cost of living got 40% cheaper, but workers were retaining their earning power.
That is incredible.
That is often cited by the sources as the magic of a sound money system. It aligns with the dominant 19th century mindset that money should be an objective, stable measure of value, like a ruler or a scale, not a subjective tool to be manipulated for government policy.
It's an incredible era of stability. But unfortunately, the 19th century ended,
It did.
and the 20th century brought mechanized global conflicts on a scale that would permanently shatter that monetary stability forever.
Which brings us to the global collapse of gold. The pattern we just explored in the Civil War, abandoning the discipline of gold to print fiat money during a geopolitical crisis, became the standard operating procedure for the entire developed world in the 20th century.
World War I was the breaking point. If you think the Civil War was expensive, World War I required unfathomable amounts of capital.
Truly unfathomable.
We are talking about massive, industrialized, mechanized warfare. Millions of soldiers, entire fleets of dreadnoughts, endless artillery shells, chemical weapons. You simply cannot pay for a war of that magnitude with the physical gold sitting in a central bank vault.
Because under a strict classical gold standard, a government's ability to wage war is severely physically restricted.
Right.
Some economists use a very powerful analogy to describe this. Gold acts as a speed limiter on the government's printing press.
I love that analogy, a speed limiter. Like the governor on a golf cart that stops you from driving at 60 miles an hour and crashing?
Exactly.
Yeah.
You can only print as much paper currency as you have physical gold in reserve to back it up.
It forces fiscal discipline.
It forces fiscal discipline on politicians. If you want to fight a war, you have to look the citizens in the eye and raise their taxes to get the gold.
But in 1914, when the guns of August fired, all the major European powers essentially looked at each other and said, "We are taking the speed limiter off."
They did.
They suspended gold convertibility for their citizens and printed massive, unbacked amounts of paper currency to buy bombs and pay troops.
And when the war ended, the wreckage wasn't just physical, it was financial. They tried to patch the gold standard back together in the 1920s, but it was a zombie system.
It was broken.
They had printed far too much paper money relative to the meager gold they actually held.
And this massive injection of fiat currency during and immediately after the war fueled the temporary euphoric illusion of the 1920s economic boom.
The roaring 20s.
Right. Flappers, jazz, everyone throwing money into the stock market. Everyone felt incredibly rich, but the foundation was built on an artificially inflated money supply.
And monetary illusions eventually, inevitably shatter. The massive credit expansion led directly to the catastrophic crash of 1929 and the subsequent Great Depression.
Oh, man.
As global trade collapsed, businesses failed, and unemployment soared to terrifying levels, governments felt immense existential pressure to stimulate their economies by injecting even more currency.
But the remaining fragile vestiges of the gold standard stood in their way.
It's a profound dilemma.
Taking away the gold standard to fix a depression sounds like taking the brakes off a car because you're stuck going uphill.
That's a good way to put it.
Sure, removing the brakes helps you start moving again, but what happens when you eventually reach the crest of the hill? How do you stop?
That is a very apt way to describe the grand 20th century monetary experiment. And this leads us to perhaps the most pivotal moment in modern economic history.
The creation of the Bretton Woods system in 1944
Yes.
set the scene for us. It's near the end of World War II. Europe is in ruins, and the Allied powers gather in a hotel in New Hampshire to literally design a new financial world order.
Exactly. You had 44 nations represented, but the real architecture was drawn up by the United States and Great Britain.
Okay.
The goal of Bretton Woods was an attempt to find a middle ground. They wanted to combine the disciplined stability of the old gold standard with the flexible, stimulating power of fiat money.
A hybrid system. How did it physically work?
They created a system where international currencies, like the British pound or the French francs, were pegged at a fixed exchange rate to the United States dollar.
Okay, pegged to the dollar.
And the U.S. dollar, in turn, was the only currency directly pegged to physical gold at a rigidly fixed price of $35 per ounce.
Got it.
And to oversee this whole massive apparatus, they created institutions you still hear about on the news today. The International Monetary Fund, or IMF, and the World Bank.
So if I'm France, my franc is tied to the dollar. And I trust the dollar because the U.S. promises that if I hand them $35, they will hand me an ounce of gold from Fort Knox.
Exactly.
It made the U.S. dollar the undisputed reserve currency of the world. But there was a fatal flaw built into the very DNA of this system, wasn't there? Something called the Triffin dilemma.
Yes. Robert Triffin was a Belgian-American economist who identified a massive paradox in the Bretton Woods architecture in the early 1960s.
What was the paradox?
He pointed out that because the whole world needed U.S. dollars to conduct international trade, the United States was forced to run continuous, massive balance of payments deficits.
Meaning the U.S. had to constantly print and export billions of dollars overseas, so the rest of the world had enough liquidity to buy oil and goods.
Correct. But here is the dilemma. The more dollars the U.S. printed and sent abroad to lubricate global trade, the more the global supply of paper dollars grew.
Right.
But the amount of physical gold sitting in Fort Knox backing those dollars remained relatively static.
It's the fractional reserve banking problem from 1812 all over again, but on a planetary scale.
Exactly. Triffin warned that eventually foreign nations would look at the massive mountain of paper dollars they held, look at the dwindling pile of American gold, and lose confidence that the U.S. could actually honor the $35 an ounce guarantee.
And he was right.
He was entirely right. By the late 1960s, the U.S. was spending astronomical sums of money fighting the Vietnam War and funding domestic Great Society programs. Inflation was rising.
And if foreign leaders started doing the math, they realized the U.S. was printing money it didn't have. French President Charles de Gaulle famously started demanding physical gold instead of paper dollars.
Yes, he did.
He literally sent the French Navy across the Atlantic to collect French gold from the New York Federal Reserve.
It was a global bank run on the United States Treasury. The gold reserves in Fort Knox were bleeding out at an alarming rate.
Wow.
And this slow-motion crisis culminated on a Sunday evening, August 15th, 1971.
The famous Nixon shock.
President Richard Nixon went on national television and unilaterally, without consulting the rest of the world, closed the gold window.
Just like that.
He officially severed the final tenuous link between the U.S. dollar and physical gold. He declared that the U.S. would no longer convert dollars to gold for foreign central banks.
I want you to imagine sitting in your living room in 1971, watching the President of the United States on a boxy TV set casually announcing that the fundamental definition of the money in your wallet has just been deleted.
It's staggering.
With that one speech, the speed limiter was permanently, totally removed.
The 1971 shock ushered in the modern, contemporary era of freely floating, pure fiat money. Every single major currency on Earth today, the dollar, the euro, the yen, floats entirely on trust in the issuing government.
Nothing backing it.
There is no gold backing, no silver backing. Nothing physical anchors the global financial system.
This is a profound historical anomaly. If you look at our timeline, for 2,500 years, from the Lydian lion rubbing electrum in 600 BCE to Alexander Hamilton to 1971, money was tied, however imperfectly, to a scarce commodity.
Right.
Now we are all engaged in a grand, global, synchronized experiment in unrestrained fiat money.
Which naturally leads us to examine the consequences highlighted by our historical and economic sources.
Yes, what does this mean for us?
Why do some prominent economists, historians, and market analysts vehemently argue that we need to bring some form of that speed limiter back? What are the actual lived consequences of navigating a pure fiat world?
The sources outline several deeply structural consequences that affect everyone listening to this right now. The most obvious, the one we feel at the grocery store, is persistent systemic inflation.
Right.
Without the physical restraint of precious metals, central banks have vastly, exponentially expanded the money supply. This leads directly to a continuous, mathematically guaranteed loss of purchasing power for everyday citizens.
And it doesn't impact everyone equally. This is where we need to understand a vital economic concept known as the Cantillon effect, named after the 18th century economist Richard Cantillon.
The Cantillon effect.
The Cantillon effect explains how new fiat money actually travels through an economy.
Walk us through how it works, step by step. Because this is the mechanics of the hidden tax we talked about.
Okay. Let's say the central bank decides to conjure 1 trillion new digital dollars out of thin air to stimulate the economy.
Standard Tuesday.
Right. That money doesn't magically appear in everyone's bank account equally at the exact same time. It enters the economy at very specific points.
Where does it go?
Usually it goes first to the government itself or to massive financial institutions and major defense or infrastructure contractors.
Okay, so a massive corporation gets $1 billion of this newly minted money.
Right. And when they get that money, prices in the broader economy haven't risen yet. They get to spend that new $1 billion buying up real assets, real estate, steel, labor, stocks at the old low prices.
But as they spend that money, it filters down. The steel supplier gets the money, and they spend it. And as this wave of new money washes through the economy, it dilutes the value of all the existing dollars.
Yes.
It bids up the prices of everything.
Exactly. By the time that new money finally trickles down to the everyday wage earner, the barista, the factory worker, the fixed income retiree, the prices of food, rent, and energy have already doubled.
Wow.
Their wages haven't caught up, but their cost of living has skyrocketed.
But let me push back. Doesn't the money eventually reach everyone? Doesn't a rising tide lift all boats?
The rising tide eventually reaches everyone, but the Cantillon effect proves that who gets the water first matters immensely. Fiat systems structurally and inherently benefit those who are closest to the money spigot: governments, large banks, asset owners, at the direct mathematical expense of wage earners and savers, whose wealth is silently confiscated through the lag in inflation.
It just transfers wealth from the bottom and middle to the top.
It transfers wealth from the bottom and middle to the top.
And this leads to a surprisingly moral and philosophical argument against fiat money, doesn't it? It's not just an argument about economic efficiency. It is an argument about basic societal honesty.
If we look at the philosophical core of the hard money argument presented by historical critics, it points to deep, ancient precedents condemning the debasement of currency as a fundamental moral failing of leadership.
They quote the biblical prophet Isaiah, condemning the corruption of ancient Israel, saying, "Your silver has become your dross, thy wine mixed with water."
It's a powerful analogy.
The analogy is perfect.
Yeah.
Debasing money or printing unbacked fiat is exactly like a merchant watering down a jug of milk and still selling it as whole milk. It is fundamentally fraud.
The economic texts also quote Martin Luther during the Reformation. He likened rulers who actively change and devalue the currency to thieves robbing the public.
Wow.
And worse, he noted that these rulers often have the audacity to accuse the public of being greedy when the public complains about the rising prices caused by the ruler's own debasement.
Oh, that sounds very familiar.
The philosophical argument here is that honest money requires a rigid moral commitment from society, ingrained in inescapable law, to replace the arbitrary, corruptible power of human monetary managers.
Because right now, the word dollar doesn't actually mean anything physical. The sources refer to this as the Red Queen problem, referencing the character in Alice in Wonderland who declares that words mean whatever she wants them to mean.
Right.
The Federal Reserve, or any central bank, can make the word dollar or euro mean whatever they please simply by expanding or contracting the supply at a keyboard.
Legally speaking, the word is entirely subjective. If you look back at Alexander Hamilton's Coinage Act of 1792, a dollar was an objective unit of measure.
It was a specific weight.
It was defined as precisely 371.25 grains of pure silver. Today, legally, a dollar is simply a Federal Reserve note denominated in dollars. It is a completely circular definition.
And economists argue this wrecks long-term capital markets because it makes long-term planning impossible. It's an analogy of measurement. Imagine trying to architect and build a 100-story skyscraper, but the measuring tape you use, the ruler, changes length every single day based on the mood of a committee in Washington.
How can you confidently build anything?
You can't. It encourages short-term speculation rather than long-term saving and true capital formation. So what is the proposed solution from the critics of fiat?
Well, many advocate for a return to the discipline of the gold standard, to explicitly redefine the dollar by law as a specific unchangeable weight of gold.
Like, say, 1 ounce of gold equals $5,000 or whatever the market clearing rate is.
Exactly.
But let's be realistic about the modern world. Returning to a physical gold standard sounds incredibly difficult. First of all, gold is incredibly heavy and physically cumbersome to transport, especially in our hyper-fast, globalized digital economy where billions of dollars move across the ocean in milliseconds.
Sure.
Nobody wants to lug a sack of heavy metal coins to the grocery store or ship bullion across the Atlantic to buy software.
It also poses a massive, terrifying security threat. If a population's wealth is entirely stored in physical gold hidden in their homes, it invites violent theft and home invasions on a massive scale.
Right.
Furthermore, we have to acknowledge the political reality. Modern banking systems and governments have a massive, entrenched, vested interest in preventing a return to a gold standard.
Why would politicians willingly put the speed limiter back on their own spending power? They wouldn't.
Exactly. A gold standard drastically restricts a government's ability to run massive deficits, wage endless wars, or fund vast social programs through the hidden tax of inflation.
So if returning to heavy, clunky physical gold isn't practically feasible for daily digital commerce, and unrestrained fiat money is slowly, continuously destroying the purchasing power of the middle class, what happens next? What is the escape valve?
It's a great question.
What if technology offers a new way to replicate the absolute scarcity of gold, but without the physical weight?
This brings us to the final frontier of our deep dive, the future of money. We are witnessing how the ancient forces of Gresham's law are operating right now, in real time, in the digital age.
Because bad money still drives out good money. But the fascinating phenomenon happening globally right now is something we can call Gresham's law in reverse.
Yes. Remember, Gresham's law, where people hoard the good money and spend the bad, operates smoothly under normal conditions where legal tender laws have the power to force people to accept the bad money.
Right.
But economic history shows that in cases of severe, catastrophic hyperinflation, the power of the law breaks down entirely.
Look at Venezuela. Under the economic mismanagement of Hugo Chavez and Nicolas Maduro, the government printed so much money to cover their debts that the national currency, the bolivar, essentially became worthless paper.
People were literally sweeping it into the gutters.
When a fiat currency falls to absolute zero trust, legal tender laws lose all of their teeth. You cannot use the law to force a starving merchant to trade a real physical chicken for a wheelbarrow full of hyperinflated worthless paper.
You just can't.
In these extreme survival scenarios, good money forces its way back into the market from the underground up. People organically, spontaneously revert to trading in things that hold real value.
They start using US dollars on the black market or trading in physical commodities. But increasingly, the sources note that they are turning to decentralized digital assets,
Cryptocurrencies.
specifically Bitcoin. It's emerging globally as a modern technological application of this good money.
It is a remarkable, almost poetic historical parallel. Just as the Lydian lion and the Carolingian penny used physical metal and state stamps to solve the problem of trust and scarcity in the physical world 2,000 years ago, decentralized computer blockchains are attempting to solve the speed limiter problem in the digital world today.
Because Bitcoin, unlike fiat currency, has a hard, mathematically enforced cap.
Right.
There will only ever be 21 million Bitcoin in existence. The code prevents any more from ever being created. You can't just spin up a digital central bank printing press and dilute the supply to fund a war.
It is fundamentally designed to act as digital gold.
And this programmatic scarcity is driving a new, massive corporate behavior that mirrors Gresham's law perfectly.
Oh, really?
Financial analysts point to a prediction made in 2021 by a strategist at the crypto exchange Kraken. He forecasted a major shift.
Okay.
That the chief financial officers of massive, publicly traded S&P 500 firms would wake up and realize their treasury reserves of fiat US dollars were actively losing purchasing power every year due to central bank inflation.
So what does a rational fiduciary CFO do to protect the company's wealth? They look for the good money. They put Bitcoin on their corporate balance sheets.
Precisely. The prediction was that these massive corporations would continue to spend their devaluing inflationary fiat US dollars for all their daily operations, paying employee salaries, buying office supplies, paying taxes.
Right, getting rid of the bad money.
But they would hoard their cryptocurrency as a pristine reserve asset, fully expecting its purchasing power to appreciate against the perpetually falling dollar.
It's exactly like the 1982 copper pennies we talked about. These multinational companies are looking at fiat dollars the exact same way everyday Americans looked at those cheap zinc pennies. Spend them fast before they lose more value.
Exactly.
And they're looking at Bitcoin the way people looked at the solid copper pennies. Hide them in the corporate vault. Hoard them. Because the fundamental asset is absolutely scarce.
The analogy holds up perfectly on a macroeconomic scale. And it is no longer just a wild prediction. Market data shows that as of early 2024, dozens of publicly traded companies like MicroStrategy and major mining firms, collectively hold over $11 billion in Bitcoin on their balance sheets.
$11 billion.
They are executing Gresham's law at an institutional multi-billion-dollar level. They are actively choosing to hoard the decentralized digital asset while freely circulating the state-backed fiat asset.
But wait, the evolution of money doesn't just stop at crypto, does it? Because I want to ask about the absolute bleeding edge of this. What comes after blockchain? What is the next leap in verifiable trust?
If we look at the absolute cutting-edge frontier of theoretical economics and physics, the next leap is quantum money.
Quantum money. That sounds like something out of a sci-fi movie. How on earth does physics tie into currency?
It's actually a concept first proposed in the 1970s by a physicist named Stephen Weisner. It relies on the mind-bending principles of quantum mechanics.
Okay.
Instead of encoding economic value in a piece of paper or even a string of regular computer code on a blockchain, quantum money encodes value in fragile quantum states, specifically using subatomic particles like photons acting as qubits.
Qubits. Okay, but why use a subatomic particle as money? What problem does that solve that Bitcoin or a dollar doesn't?
It solves the ultimate problem of counterfeiting. In physics, there is a fundamental rule called the no-cloning theorem.
The no-cloning theorem.
It states that it is physically, mathematically impossible to create an identical copy of an unknown quantum state. If you try to observe or copy a qubit, the very act of observing it destroys its delicate quantum state entirely.
Whoa. So if a counterfeiter tries to scan or copy a quantum dollar to make a fake one, the dollar literally self-destructs.
Exactly. It provides theoretically unforgeable security, guaranteed not by a government law, not by a blockchain algorithm, but by the fundamental laws of the physical universe itself.
That is wild.
This money would be stored in specialized quantum wallets and transferred globally via secure fiber optic networks or satellites. It represents the ultimate unbreakable verification stamp.
That is absolutely mind-blowing. The evolution of trust, from a lion stamped on a rock to subatomic particles. Let's take a breath and recap this incredible journey. We started with ancient farmers realizing the double coincidence of wants made bartering a nightmare, driving them to find scarce commodities like cowrie shells.
Right.
We saw the Lydian kings invent the ultimate verification badge by stamping roaring lions onto electrum.
We watched Alexander Hamilton try, and ultimately fail, to permanently fix the price of gold and silver with the 1792 Coinage Act, proving Gresham's law that bad money inevitably drives out good.
We witnessed how the extreme financial stress of war leads governments to break their monetary contracts, from the War of 1812 to the massive, chaotic issuance of Civil War greenbacks.
We traced the entire global system abandoning the speed limiter of the gold standard during the massive conflicts of the 20th century. We saw the Bretton Woods system buckle under the Triffin dilemma, culminating in President Nixon permanently severing the dollar from gold in 1971.
Leading us directly into our current, unprecedented era of global fiat currency, where persistent inflation quietly erodes purchasing power through the Cantillon effect.
Exactly.
And finally, we explored how this erosion is driving modern citizens and massive corporations to seek out new forms of good money hoarding, absolutely scarce digital assets like cryptocurrency, playing out Gresham's law on a planetary scale.
It is an endless cycle of trust, debasement, collapse, and technological innovation that has repeated for millennia. And it leaves us with a profound, almost uncomfortable question to consider about the future.
What's that?
If money is, at its absolute core, simply a psychological measure of human trust,
Which we've seen it is.
what happens to the traditional power of the nation-state when its citizens fundamentally trust a decentralized, mathematically enforced string of digital code or a quantum particle more than they trust the face of the politician printed on their paper bills?
Oh, wow.
Will we soon see a future where governments can no longer mandate value by law, but instead have to actively fiscally compete for our economic trust.
But that is something serious to mull over the next time you pull a crumpled dollar bill out of your pocket. Thank you so much for coming along on this massive deep dive with us. Keep questioning the everyday things around you, keep looking for the mechanics behind the curtain, and we will see you on the next one.